Not a delightful situation there, and just when you thought the flood was not in your area, you find the consequences. That's what's happening in the Federal Capital Territory. So even though the residents in Kogi State and Nasarawa and all those areas are facing the flood, the spillover effect is hitting food prices, hitting, of course, petrol stations. And don't be surprised if in Lagos you also feel that pinch, because everywhere is connected and everyone is connected. Well, that's why we're having this conversation from our commodity space now with Bolanle Agbaje, analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Hi, Bolanle. Good morning.
Hi.
Yeah, so that's not a very clean, not a very happy one.
Not very
for
happy.
Yeah, but neither is it happy for us in our crude oil space.
Yes.
For the second consecutive month now, we are producing below
1
million.
Yes.
And this is a country that used to produce about 2 million.
Yes, yes. It's quite sad, but it's the new reality that we're facing at the moment. All these risks were always there for the fact that we had not solved the problems of oil vandalism, theft, and all of that. And it seems like the government seems to be hopeful about, where we'll get to in the next year or two when it comes to our oil production. So I'm sure they're working tirelessly to make sure that we reach, at that same point that we were before. And I guess that's why, most people are not really taking, as much as obviously OPEC Plus cut production by about 2 million barrels per day. In reality, most analysts expect that this might not necessarily be the case, because how many of those countries are actually meeting, their quota? So it might not necessarily be a cut. It might actually be, most countries trying to find ways to actually ramp up production to
even
where
the
it was
countries
before.
like Saudi Arabia have insisted that they're
Yes.
going to even implement the cuts.
Yeah, because they can see the numbers. They can see the fact that, right now a lot of countries are struggling to meet, their oil quotas or their oil targets. And it calls to question when it comes to the recession talks that most analysts, are having. A lot of countries are actually struggling. On the good news, obviously, we have the fact that global commodity prices are, they're showing good signs of reduction in price.
Yeah, but I mean, the escalating war in Ukraine is now
not going to keep that good
before
for
we
some
leave
time.
Nigeria, because I don't know if you've been following Channel Television. We have this series that our correspondent Olu Philip is out in the creeks, and
Okay.
and I think it's the NNPC Limited. They're working on exposing some of those areas where this oil theft actually take place, and how we've seen a lot of the pipelines and things like that. Do you think that the government is confident that because they're exposing some of these things now, we will be able to meet up with the 1.68 that is in the budget?
I'm not so. Obviously, you wouldn't really say the 1.68, but I'm sure that it wouldn't be as bad as it is now, of below 1 million.
It's really bad now.
It's
below
really
1
bad
million.
now. So I don't see it getting as bad as this. But obviously, showing all those loopholes in the oil situation that is going on now would obviously bring to light or reduce the oil thefts that is currently happening. I think I saw a news of somebody that had already put their own pipes to take out. Yeah, so there was that news as well, and that obviously it's not necessarily great for the country. So I'm sure bringing that out to light would more or less reduce their.
I mean, showing it for the camera and not doing anything about it will not make a lot of difference.
So obviously,
because we've always known that these things exist.
Yes.
We've always known of the bunkers. We've always known. Even I myself have visited an area in Rivers State and I've been shown, but that was years ago. So these things are not new.
Yes.
Even though we're getting the pictures and all of that, they are not new. So if we see it on camera and that's the end of the story, it doesn't change the reality.
Yeah, but at the same time, at this point, it's in Nigeria's best interest, especially for the government, to actually solve this problem, because you've seen a situation where other countries around the world are looking at this, and Nigeria, where it used to be, is not where it is now. So I'm sure for them to actually gain that power of remaining the top country in Africa, I'm sure it's necessary for them to do something. Obviously, we do know stealing happens here and there, but when it gets to a point where it becomes shameful for the nation,
yeah, this is so obvious.
Yes, it is, and I'm sure it's something that they would obviously. I'm not saying that the stealing would stop completely, but for those that don't more or less have favors with the government, I'm sure they will be hit first.
All right, I didn't hear you say that. I didn't hear that at all. But you know, we talked about implementation of the budget yesterday,
Yes.
and now we're talking about oil theft, which of course is connected, because if revenue is connected to crude oil, then
Yes, of course.
it's one and the same.
Yeah.
And I asked a question. We're talking about how they're exposing the oil thefts now, the avenues and all of that. Who will do something about it? Is it this present administration or the incoming administration?
Obviously, the present administration only has, give or take, 4 months left to, do something, which is not necessarily possible. I don't think in the next 4 months something significant would happen.
With all the politics and political activities in the air.
But it also depends. So when the new government, whoever it is that comes in and takes over, I think it'll be in their best interest to make it work, because it's currently what Nigeria feeds off from. We're still struggling to, ramp up production when it comes to other agricultural commodities. Right now, the budget is majorly funded by, the revenue from oil. So I think it will be in any administration's best interest to make it work, because whatever their plans are, the revenue would be needed to fund, whatever project that they have in place.
So we do hope that those politicians are watching. At least, please watch Channel Television and look at those areas, and then start strategizing even now, not when you get into office, not when you have won the election. I mean, a strategy now.
Yes.
I think
so it would be a different case if oil prices were at, the lows that we had seen of like $23 per barrel. Right now, it's about 94.
Yeah, 95.
Yeah, $95 per barrel, and it's great for us to actually benefit from that. And so I don't think any administration will take that for granted, at least not now.
And then this affecting a gasoline payment.
Yes. So the NNPC released a report that most of these marketers should not expect payments at least for the next 2 to 2 to 3 days to a week, and that's not necessarily great, and that's obviously because they're struggling with their output, and they obviously have to make sure that they can actually make these payments. And obviously this news of giving them the information ahead of time is obviously more or less what most of these marketers can more or less rely on. So I don't know. I guess the NNPC would obviously look for ways to, after solving this problem of vandalism, look for ways to make payments to these marketers. But what we do expect is that would oil prices, or would fuel pump price stay at what it is now? Would they factor that into the cost?
Yeah, well, they've told us subsidy is going off next year.
Yes. So it's nice to it's time to brace for what oil prices will be. But
once again, it's this administration that is saying it, because this administration had promised us that subsidy was going to end.
So we don't really
And then
know
when we saw the social reaction, the reaction and the threats to political campaigns and all of that, we did see a turnaround. So we cannot confidently say that the next administration would not continue, just putting things in.
Yeah, so what is likely to happen is that, just to gain favor, whoever wins, this next political cycle, it will be in their best interest to obviously keep the subsidy, because maybe that's what's popular at the moment. But I'm sure that even if they do, it will be in the best interest of the country to actually remove this subsidy and feel the heat now for the benefits in the nearest future. So obviously I hear what you say when it seems like the next administration is likely to keep this subsidy, but it would be nice to watch and see. Like we always say, when you have a political cycle coming in, everything is just up in the air. Nobody really knows what to expect, and it would be nice to see what happens after the next cycle comes in.
Well, I guess the bottom line lies with Nigerians. If Nigerians are convinced...
Well, I don't think Nigerians understand,
the importance and the implication of this continuous subsidy payments. I think for 2023, they have about 6 trillion naira for the first 5 or 6 months for subsidy.
Huge amounts. But, when you're talking about the average Nigerian consumer, they're looking at what's in their pocket, how they're struggling at the moment.
How they feed every day.
Right now, everything is costly. Transportation costs, cost of food, beverages, every single thing, you know, the staples, all of that has increased significantly. And, you know, more or less, if you're adding a situation where you're removing subsidies, it's obviously adding to the pain that they're feeling. And, you know, most times that's the initial, you know, burden that they have to deal with. And I'm sure, so I don't necessarily blame the average Nigerian for not seeing the future. The impact of removing the subsidy, nobody would feel the benefit of it until, you know, a few years from now. And it's not easy for a struggling Nigerian to see that.
Remember when Egypt removed the subsidy on bread?
Yeah.
They had protests and unrest in the country.
But right now, it seems like it's benefiting them.
Yeah, and they are even in a dire situation now. They've devalued their currency. They're being asked to devalue again if they are to access the IMF loan.
Yes, and so is many African countries at the moment.
Ghana is there, Kenya.
Ghana is currently ranked the worst, you know, the Ghanaian cedi is ranked the worst, you know, currency in the world. And, you know,
and I think Fitch downgraded them to almost junk.
Yes, and, you know, Nigeria is currently ranked, I think, 11th. And so it seems like we're still doing great when it compared to, you know, some of these other countries. But, you know,
but the reality of it to an average
Nigerian is obviously not, you know, great, but it shows that we're all in the same, you know, burden that we're currently facing. Right now, it's tough for a lot of countries, and not just the developing countries, the developed countries as well. They're also facing the heat. You know, you're having inflation numbers spiking significantly amongst all countries. A lot of analysts are currently expecting a recession. It's not necessarily great for, you know, some of these countries. Even with oil production, you don't see a situation where, you know, the OPEC Plus has met and they've decided what they want to do, but you have Biden's administration ready to, you know, they're retaliating in the sense that they're like, they're going to draw down as much as they can with the strategic reserve. Everyone is desperate at the moment.
Everyone is desperate, but, you know, I think one thing that makes Nigeria peculiar is we have not explored the opportunities we have.
Yes.
For instance, if we didn't have the issue of oil thefts, if we had our crude oil refined in Nigeria, you know, we will not feel the pinch this much.
Yes, we wouldn't. But, you know, it's what is our reality now. We've said, you know, times without number that, you know, we're currently facing the burden of what we didn't do in the past few years. At the time when things were going well for Nigerians and we were making huge amounts of money, we didn't, you know, think to invest, you know, in growing the economy significantly. And now we're facing the heat. So it's just a terrible time for Nigerians at the moment.
All right, so let's take a break from that before we start shedding tears on air. Well, the escalating war in Ukraine, we see wheat prices back up again.
Yes,
I think it's breaking that trend of 4 months of drop in.
Yes, so what I even saw in the papers was the fact that this particular attack is more or less similar to the first attack that happened. So we do expect that, you know, with the retaliations that would happen between both countries, we expect that, you know, agricultural products particularly that were affected initially will definitely be affected. Wheat prices are currently at about $941 per bushel, and it's crazy that we're even saying this at the moment, and it seems like the $1,000 per bushel is not so far off, and it's ridiculous for us right now. And we are, you know, net importers of wheat. So what does it speak about bread? Bread is currently trading at about 800 naira to about 850 naira per loaf, and obviously, what does that mean if wheat prices are expected to go up?
And then you have Christmas.
And then you have the Christmas demand coming as well. Let's see. It'll be nice to see what happens this Christmas in terms of the demand for major products.
Yeah, because we saw last Christmas demand was not as much.
It wasn't
as it used to be. So people are cutting.
Yes. So is it going to be a supplier's market or you know, the demand you know, market? But it'll be nice to see what happens to well, the consumers and the suppliers during that period.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think I'm scared. I'm not looking forward to it, but it's time for a break. Bolanle Agbaje, thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time. Always a pleasure. I'm sure we'll move the other conversations to Thursday when you'll be back here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, we'll take a break now, but we're not leaving that commodity space. It's not a good one. When we still talk about food, we saw a company devastated, losing over $15 million worth of planted crops because of flood. We'll talk about that after the break. This is Business Morning on Channels Television.